Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Buenos dias. And welcome to the webinar, Investing in Sustainability, a 5-step guide to thematic bonds and investments. I'm James Crombie, a senior editor at Bloomberg News, responsible for global credit markets, and I'm delighted to be here for 2 reasons. One, sustainable finance is one of the fastest growing markets that we cover at Bloomberg News. And just looking at the bond markets alone, sustainable issuance is now over $3 trillion, up from 2 trillion just 8 months ago. So it's growing incredibly quickly. The second reason I'm excited to be here is I've been covering Latin America as a journalist for more than 25 years. And I've lived in Mexico City, I've lived in Bogota, I've traveled extensively throughout the region. And I'm really fascinated to watch the development of Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what our panelists have to say. Some announcements before we start. All microphones and cameras will remain off during the session. We have set aside some time at the end for our audience to ask questions, so please submit your questions using the Zoom chat option. And there is simultaneous translation to Spanish available. So please click on the world icon on the lower part of your screen to enable that. In this webinar, we'll discuss how to issue thematic bonds to unlock capital markets flows to finance assets with positive social and environmental impact. We'll start by hearing what is the perspective of Gemma Sacristan, the Chief Investment Officer of IDB Invest. And we'll also have a panel of experts looking at companies and banks in the region and how they can meet growing international demand for thematic bonds and the key steps that they can undertake to align sustainability and financing strategies to tap this huge global opportunity. So with that, I'd like to start just by introducing Gemma Sacristan. She is the, as I said, Chief Investment Officer at the IDB Invest, which promotes economic development in Latin America and the Caribbean through its private sector programs. It has over $13 billion in assets under management and 385 clients in 26 countries. Gemma joined the IDB in 2008, and prior to that, she worked at banks in Madrid, London, and in New York. So with that, Gemma, I'd like to hand it over to you, and just to get the conversation started, what's the current market landscape globally and in Latin America and the Caribbean, please?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, James, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. The pandemic, as all of us know, has severely damaged Latin America and the Caribbean, putting a strain on government finances and deepening existing inequalities. It had also provided a wake-up call and an opportunity to embrace transformations in our path to rebuilding our economies better. Our work at the IDB Group is guided by the clear focus on promoting sustainable and inclusive growth, as laid out in our Vision 2025. Thematic bonds are an increasingly important financing tool to support this sustainable growth. Worldwide, between 2016 and 2020, the sustainable debt market reached 1.7 trillion, 700 billion of these were issued in 2020, almost double from the previous year. During 2020, while green remained the dominant theme, the social and sustainability themes grew dramatically, achieving higher volumes than all previous years combined. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we have also seen a rapid growth in thematic bond issuances, growing from 2,200 million in 2018 to 11,200 million in 2020, and this is very important, and an even greater surge in 2021, reaching 15,600 million during the first half of the year. IDB Invest has supported the issuance of 20 thematic bonds for a volume of around 1.2 billion, in many cases helping our clients to be pioneers in their own countries in the region of worldwide. For example, we're supporting the first sustainable bond in Argentina issued by Banco Vice, the first social bonds in Peru issued by Banco Pichincha, or Brazil issued by Banco ABC, and the first gender bond in Ecuador, also issued by Banco Pichincha. Also, we have supported pioneer bonds in the region, as the first gender bond issued by Banismo in Panama, or the first green bond certified by the Climate Bond Initiative for the housing sector issued by CADU last year in Mexico. But also we have supported the world's first gender-linked bond based on achieving outcomes issued by Davivienda in Colombia. We are also looking to support the growth of this asset class in the region by creating and disseminating knowledge to spark interest of potential players. For example, last week we published a report on blue bonds, presenting the diverse type of companies and market opportunities that can be linked to this type of bonds. A couple of weeks ago, we also launched our Investing in Sustainability reports that offer tools to help issuers assess their readiness compared with best practices and provides a practical roadmap for issuances, including key guidelines on the different steps that are necessary to give the bond its thematic flavor. We are also supporting the harmonization and standardization of reporting. Together with our colleagues from the IDB, we launched 2 months ago the Green Bond Transparency Platform to promote greater transparency and comparability for investors. This platform supports consistent, transparent, and reliable reporting of impacts generated by all green bonds in the region and allows tracking of impact to build a track record on green bond use or proceed to generate confidence in the growing market in Latin America and the Caribbean. Finally, we are also incorporating thematic bonds as part of our own funding program. In January this year, we proudly published our own sustainable debt framework. This is the first, very important, the first ICMA-aligned sustainability debt framework for a high-grade multilateral development bank. In February, we launched a $1 billion sustainable bond to support the economic recovery of the region, followed by our first gender bond issued in Mexico for $122 million. And just 2 weeks ago, we placed a transition bond in Japan for the equivalent to $100 million. To finish, I would like to invite you to join us to take advantage of this opportunity and the opportunity provided by the thematic bonds market to support the construction of a more sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma. Very complete introduction. There's a huge amount going on, obviously, to get into today in this discussion. And joining us, I'm delighted to welcome a really great panel of experts. Kurt Vogt is Managing Director of HPL, which provides advisory services for sustainable finance. David Gray is Sustainability and Communications Manager at Pichincha. We also have from IDB Invest, Carol Sanz-Paris, Head of Capital Markets, and Colin McKee, the ESG Lead Officer. So a really great range of perspectives here, and I hope you'll join us in quizzing them and getting some good answers. But to start the conversation, just wanted to direct a question at Carol, please, because there is so much interpretation, there is so much confusion out there, and that's a big problem for investors right now to get their heads around all the acronyms, all of the definitions. What do we in this context mean by sustainable finance, and what is the market opportunity, and also why is the IDB getting involved? Sorry, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, great, got it.
Thank you, James. So for me, sustainable finance is activism. Activism towards a climate neutral, climate resilient, resource efficient, and an inclusive economy, which the COVID-19 pandemic heightened. Equity or debt investor can intentionally and proactively invest in companies that have a positive social impact, and they can exclude companies that do not. And to make that decision, they consider environmental, social, and governance into their investment analysis. For me, thematic bond, which includes social, green, or sustainable bond, and which is also the focus of today's webinar, are one of the major financial innovations of the past decades. When I started my formative years in investment banking 20 years ago in debt capital markets, I could observe that debt holders' sole concern was to ensure that they got their money back, with little care, provided it was legal about the company's business. However, equity investors at that time were already starting to blacklist non-ethical sectors, armed gamblings. It was not the thematic yet, the thematic as we know it, or sustainable finance. They were just guidance in the market, preventing doing the wrong thing rather than promoting doing the right thing. So for me, thematic bonds one of the instruments within the sustainable finance umbrella and specific to the debt securities, are one of the greatest financial innovation in that they integrate ESG values into credit. So they promote doing the right thing. And it has awakened the largest investor community. As we know, the debt capital markets are the largest securities market. And we see that the bonds can play a significant role in catalyzing investment to achieve the sustainable development goals. So SDGs complement and support ESG consideration as they provide a language, something that speaks to you with respect for area of impact. So we all know, or some of us, we tend to learn about the different SDGs. So it speaks to us. So we can see tangibly where the money is going. So the growth in the thematic asset class is impressive, as Emma commented, but it is still a fraction of the overall size of the debt securities market. But the potential is there, and there were recent research from JP Morgan, which estimate that there will be 2.5 trillion of investment required for climate action and sustainable development over the next 10 years. And coming back to Latin America and the Caribbean, also the focus of today's webinar, Thematic Bonds offers a tangible opportunity. And given our mandate and focus on social and green investment, we, as an entity, as a bank, a multilateral development bank of the private sector, we can play a major role in the creation and the expansion of the thematic bond market. So in addition to achieving the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that I mentioned earlier, thematic bonds for our region can also help develop local debt capital markets. So it's a double benefit because, as you know, the local debt capital markets are not fully developed in our region. We've got the exception of Chile, Mexico, and Brazil. And developed debt capital markets are key to reduce the private sector's dependency on external borrowing in our region. So this new asset class create new investment opportunities and will increase the participation from investors. So we need from issuers. So we need issuers. We need investment opportunities in order to attract those investors. So thematic bond issuance in LAC represent less than 2% of global thematic bond issuance, but we can see that the market is growing quickly, and this is due also because of the spilling over from ESG investor from high-grade market or traditional thematic bond markets looking at the developing markets. And Latin America is benefiting, and as a case in point in terms of issuance, year to date, we widely surpass the volume of last year.
But to keep a market going, and to your point of activism, an investor is not going to get involved and stay involved unless they're making money. And the flip side is an issuer is probably not going to stay focused on this if it's going to cost too much. So could you talk a little bit about the costs to the issuer and the benefits to an investor?
Okay, so going back to the title of this webinar, if you recall, it's called Investing in Sustainability. And it's investing in sustainability from the point of view of an issuer. And it's true that there are costs associated with an issuance of a thematic bond, but as any investment, we should expect returns. So any issuer should expect some returns. The cost. Yes, there are costs associated with analysis of the environmental and social capacity of the issuer. There may be changes to be performed on the IT system to ensure tracking of the assets. There will be also costs associated with the reporting with respect to the use of proceeds. And there will be also costs associated with the issuance itself, putting in place a framework, but we will go back into detail. But ultimately, the benefit is there because it has been proven, and we've got substantial data that the organizations who are also looking at ESG and pushing for ESG as part of their sustainability strategy, they can benefit and they are profitable in the long term because the organization and operation are sustainable. And we've got plenty of evidence about that. So yes, there are costs, but the benefit for me are much greater because an issuer, once they issue a thematic bonds, they will also attract new type of investors with sustainability mandates. They can also use the thematic bond issuance as a branding exercise. So it would allow the issuer to promote the organization's sustainability practices. It's true. And one point that has been raised many times in terms of placing the bond in the market, can we demonstrate that the the price, it's more attractive compared to a standard bond issuance. Maybe not yet, but it's a long-term adventure. So, and also one point to take into consideration is that traditionally thematic bond or sustainable finance has been limited to a big share to a buy and hold investor. So there is not as much a transaction, allowing to follow really what is the evolution of the price in the secondary market. And it's also one of the roles that we want to develop as a multilateral institution. In the long term, it's the ability to create markets and to create a more liquid market, allowing for price discovery of the asset class.
Okay, great. So, I mean, I'm hoping we can also talk with the panel about the benefits to an investor, whether if you invest $1 in ESG bonds, you'll make more or less than plain vanilla bonds, but we'll probably get to that later. But as you say, it's a long-term process, so maybe it's too early to say. But just moving to Kurt quickly to bring you in, what you advise on sustainability issues, what are the standards and what do they actually mean to an issuer or an investor? Because there are so many, it's an alphabet soup. It's very, very confusing. What's going on? Can you explain that to us, Kurt?
Yeah, I would give a little bit of a historic perspective here. I mean, the thematic bond market is relatively young. I mean, we're talking about 15 years really, and it all started at the beginning without any standards. I mean, it was like the big development finance institutions issuing green bonds initially. This was starting in 2007. By 2014, the International Capital Markets Association assembled a group of or several working groups of bankers, investors, and issuers to put some order into this thing, and that created the voluntary guidelines that we have today, the ICMA guidelines that have four basic principles. One is to define the use of proceeds of the bond and the eligible categories of what you can call green initially, but then the other themes as we will see in a while. The second principle is the process to select these projects. The third one is the management of proceeds. What do you do with the money until you actually apply them to all these projects? And the fourth one is how to provide transparency and have a process of reporting. I would say since then, I mean, it started with green bonds, but it evolved into social bonds, sustainability bonds, which is the mix. Some of the use of proceeds are green, the other ones are social, and then you have the blue bonds and so forth. No. The market has evolved, and there are some specialized standards as well provided by CBI, the Climate Bond Initiative, and you can get a green bond certification from them. And I think that the latest development is that actually the EU has established expert groups to put together a green or a sustainable finance taxonomy. So this is moving and becoming more and more mainstream, and eventually it will be baked into actual regulation. And so that is this part. And what does the market expect? What does an investor expect from this? Well, the investors really expect two things. They expect their return. As Carol was saying, I mean, they still want, at this risk, this is the return that I want, but also they expect impact, and in addition of that, I mean, in a thematic bond, they get an additional benefit, which is enhanced transparency, and transparency has value for investors and insights into the ESG management of the issuer. So anyway, that defines a little bit what the market is, and I could go into who actually plays a role in this. Basically, you have four players. You have the issuer, you have the thematic bond structuring advisor, you have the verifier, who is the SPO provider, and you have the investment bank. These are the four parts that, or the four players that play a role here. And I will talk a little bit about the role of the thematic bond advisor, which in this case is what my company does, which is actually start with a diagnostic of the situation and review the portfolio of the issuer. If it's a bank, it's a credit portfolio. If it is a company, you look at their projects and see where are eligible categories. And then you look into their systems, into their management, into their capacity to actually manage a bond like this. And if we feel that is sufficient or sufficiently good, we move ahead and write a framework. And that framework has all these elements that I talked about, these four components. And that's when the SPO provider comes in, verifies it, and actually talks about how, whether the standards are met, number one, and number two, measure against best practice. And that's where issuers can differentiate among each other. And finally, the investment bank comes in, does the usual process that you do for a bond, the due diligence, the legal documentation, and the marketing materials, approaches the investor with an enhanced story because it includes the thematic aspect of it, and places the bond. So that's more or less the story that you were asking me about, James.
But how do we, with all of these definitions and everyone involved, how do we guarantee, you know, some of these projects are very long term. How do we know that the money's going to end up where people say it is? Is it like organic food where there's a rubber stamp and we just have no idea what's in the sausage? I mean, it's open to potential risk, right?
For sure. I mean, there is the ESG risk, if you wanna call it, and I think it's a very, very good question, because as I said, these standards are voluntary and they are not legally binding, no? But I would say on the flip side, I mean, when you look at the value of a company today, or in general, intangibles is a large proportion of the market capitalization of a company. And within the intangibles, you have one word, which is reputation. And when you think about these four players that I just described, the issuer, the thematic structuring advisor, the SPO provider, and the investment bank, they all have a stake on this to protect their reputation. And in a capitalist system, I mean, you want to strive to increase the value of your company and or not deteriorate the value of your company, for sure. And so reputation is somewhat of a guarantee that things are going to, that the company is going to end up doing what they are saying that they are doing. Not all of them, but most of them. And I think there's a fifth player, and that's you, James, and the whole press that is very specialized, that understands this, and that can call out something that is not right. And so I think when you look at this market, it is getting at a point where it is quite better understood what it means to be green, the same way when maybe 100 years ago you were saying, okay, what is a B credit or a AA credit or a AAA credit? So I think people are starting to differentiate among issuers.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a ton of liquidity in capital markets, and investors want to invest, and some of them aren't looking particularly closely at what they're investing in, which may backfire later on. But those are all great points, Kurt. Thank you. Just to bring in Colin here, what does the performance actually look like, and how do you actually assess and mitigate the ESG risks linked to the issuance of a thematic bond?
No, so it's a great question, James, and I think I want to draw on what some of the other panelists have said. I mean, I think Kurt, most directly defined, and Kurt framed it, performance. So when we're talking about environmental and social performance, it's about return and impact, and I think we're looking at the same variables in the context of the thematic bond space. you flagged it, and we've heard a lot of it today. There's alphabet soup, and there's a lot of jargon in this marketplace. But by and large, we have themes, and the themes are blue, they're green, they're sustainable, they're SDG, they're gender. And that may sound very kind of jargony, but I think we can distill this into specific key performance indicators within each of those flavors. Those, in essence, become the defined objectives or targets against which then performance is measured. And so depending on the sector that you look at, whether it's agribusiness or water and sanitation or manufacturing, you can define specific E&S performance areas. So that could be percentage of certified and organic agriculture. It could be installed renewable energy capacity. It could be number of mortgages, green mortgages offered. So I think there's a wide range of what constitutes performance, and I think that's measured at the level of the issuance. But I think where we're really seeing performance more closely evaluated, and we're seeing the sophistication in the market, is when it moves to the level of the issuer. I think increasingly the market is stepping away from just saying, okay, I want to see good performance within the context of the issuance, ring-fenced, but now I want to know if the issuer really has that capacity, that governance in place, that risk management system, those policies and procedures. And that's where we're seeing this new thematic bond space, which is sustainability linked bonds. And that moves back to the issuer. And performance there looks at what is the commitment of the issuer in terms of its corporate activities. So I think that's an exciting space. In terms of then assessment and risk mitigation, I think Kurt highlighted it. So ultimately, what we would expect of either an issuance or an issuer is to I think more specifically account for non-financial costs, non-financial risks. So you're looking at how environmental and social risks are embedded into that investment decision process. And to that extent, how is the issuer assessing and mitigating those risks, either associated with the thematic bond itself or within their own corporate practices? So evaluation looks at the various things Kurt mentioned: use of proceeds, process for project evaluation, management of proceeds, reporting. And that's where the evaluation process, be it through certification or through second-party opinion providers, really evaluates whether that capacity is in place and whether that performance is really being delivered as the investors expect.
That's great. Thank you, Colin. We have an actual issuer here, which is fantastic, because I always like to talk to the issuer and find out their perspective, unfiltered and live. I've always seen Pichincha as a great innovator as well, from mobile banking to many things over the decades I've covered the bank. But you were one of the first to issue a green bond, and IDB obviously helped. How did you find that process? How did the proceeds support the green agenda? What were the big challenges, and what do you think you really achieved by that?
Hi, James. Well, the first issuance of the green bond in Ecuador was a very important step to attract more environmental investment to the country, open the international scene, and show ourselves as a country truly committed to sustainable development. Thanks to the issuance, we were able to jump from a placement of 35 million to 153 million, benefiting more than 30,000 clients and promoting more sustainable business, lifestyle, and building and guarantee for future generations. Additionally, the relationship with multilateral organizations such as IDB was strengthened. These organizations have supported the bank and the financial sector in improving their management models, such as the evaluation of social and environmental risks in credit that Colin just mentioned, and offer a focus on agricultural sector, created a sustainability culture, among others. This issuance also allowed us to measure the impact of financing on problems of global concern, such as climate change, environmental pollution, and excessive use of resources. This is why in 2019, we joined the United Nations Principles for Responsible Banking and the initiative of this PICAF platform with the aim of measuring the environmental and social benefits of financing and thus setting goals towards a low or zero carbon portfolio.
The issuance that you did, any thematic bond issuance from your perspective or as an issuer, you're going to have to pay more, you're going to have to get consultants, you're going to have to get certifications, you're going to have to monitor the proceeds use over time. Can you talk a bit about the costs, and also on the flip side, what were the benefits in terms of, you know, actual hard numbers? Did you find that you got a better pricing on the bond? Did you find that you brought in a brand new investor base that you think is going to benefit you over the long haul? What are the costs and benefits of that transaction, please?
Well, the benefits were great, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the internal challenges that we have in the issuance. At Banco Pichincha, we developed the green concept, bio or bio. We are a bank that gives life. Through it, we offer green credits for all segments and types of clients, by differentiating an innovative value in the market, by offering client training, environmental technical assistance, and we also offer payment for sustainable certifications. Internally, the efforts were concentrated on developing tools, informative materials, training for the sales department in a dynamic, simple biocredit process, and with technical assistance from the sustainable finance area. By being the first experience in Ecuador, it was a challenge to understand the legal treatment of the bond emission and its instrumentation with the local authorities. That was a big challenge. Above all, it was a challenge to build consciousness and involve the entire organization in the identification and promotion of green credits aligned to the standards such as the Green Bond Principles and the eligibility criteria. However, the results of the process were very positive. They have set a high management standard, and they have also strengthened Banco Pichincha's environmental commitment.
But in terms of the actual, cost of it, was it a high cost to the bank of actually doing it in terms of financial costs?
Well, the costs that we had to incur on the issues were paid by the same issuance. So okay. I mean, it was really good for the bank, and actually, because of this great experience, we are right now in the process of a second thematic bond. So we are now also working with IDB for the first. This is a great news for the first gender bond in the country.
How big will that be?
We are in the process of that negotiation.
When do you think you'll issue?
We're expecting maybe by the end of the year or the first quarter of next year.
Okay. And any plans to do more green bonds?
Well, we have a chance to implement a second phase of the same issuance. We are thinking about it, but we are now going to focus on gender. We already have the green products, and they are still, going on. We didn't stop our green products, but now we are going to launch the gender products.
Okay, great. So you're in the market for the long term. You're a big bank, though. Is this something that only really big institutions can do, or can anyone in Ecuador do this kind of issuance?
Right now, any bank could make issuance. We have already the experience of smaller banks in the country that already they made an issuance of a social bond. It was maybe 20 or 30 million, but they are already making issuance of these types.
And so you think other companies, not just banks, could do this in Ecuador?
Totally.
I don't know if Carol or Colin want to weigh in on, you worked on those deals. Anything else you'd like to say about Ecuador specifically?
Well, I know we would like, yeah, we're looking forward to the gender bond, not Ecuador specifically, at least our work at IDB Invest is accompanied for this first of its type transaction, and hopefully we want Banco Pichincha to continue with a recurrent program with this type of issuance. But it's exactly this story for Banco Pichincha. We're trying to replicate across the region. And also one point to make, and it's also in relation to questions that we received via the chat. In terms of the experience of IDB Invest, it's interesting to see that we've been mostly supporting the financial institution in Latin America and the Caribbean. We see this as a way to really granularly being able to support the real economy in the region. And it's in contrast with the type of thematic bond issuance that have been issued in Latin America, which were specifically for segments such as, well, we know the Clabin, the Susano. Also, we had transaction in project finance associated with infrastructure renewable project, but it's quite noticeable to see that we've been pushing really for the financial institution, and really the story of Banco Pichincha is a success that we'd like to speak about.
Are there other countries that are as advanced in this as Ecuador? It seems that we're talking about Ecuador, and it seems like it's ahead of the curve.
For the green, obviously, we've got the story. We are quite advanced as well in Colombia. We've been involved in a sustainable transaction. We have the first green bond in the region. So I would say that Colombia is really well advanced. Even they are incorporating some aspect of the thematic bond framework into the regulation at the time of issuance, which is a first. Obviously, Brazil, it's big, not necessarily for issuance associated with a financial institution. It has been more developed. Also, Brazil is the biggest debt capital market, so it makes sense that they are also well advanced. And we have been involved as well in transaction in Chile, which is also a big market to look at, and Mexico. But one of the goals of the IDB is to be able to help the smaller country and even the small island in the region. So we are looking really for innovation and being able to do the first of its kind transaction for some of the countries.
These deals that we're talking about with Pichincha, for example, they're relatively small for a big international investor, but are they targeted at international investors, or is it mostly domestic participation?
Most of the transactions so far we've been involved in were for the local debt capital markets. And I said earlier, we want to develop first the local debt capital markets in the region. Obviously, we want to help issuers in bridging out into the international debt capital markets. We are involved in an international capital market transaction for BDMG, Banco de Desenvolvimento de Minas Gerais, last year. So a successful transaction, and it was in the international capital markets. So we do a bit of both, but given that our goal in developing local capital markets, we start with the local capital markets. And as you rightly say, the size of the transaction tend to be smaller.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just to bring in Colin here, how do you think that countries can in the region work together, share success stories, do what Pichincha did in other countries? How could they also share a framework of guidelines for thematic investing?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and I think it is this question around what do we need to see. I think it's hard to define it at a regional level, to be honest, because it needs to really account for the local differences that we see in each country. I think in terms of priorities, the priorities are vast, right? We can define it in terms of biodiversity or climate or water or gender, and there are really kind of different levels of maturity across countries. But I think what we can really hope to see to further support the development of these markets at a local level is around alignment. And I think Ecuador and Pichincha's work is a great example, because I think what we saw was a supportive regulatory environment. We saw leadership at a local level, and we saw clear market opportunities. Said another way, I think there were clear development challenges to prioritize, for which Pichincha could then allocate capital. And that's going to be different across countries. What can we do to support it? I think we can really help guide on what standardization looks like. We're very active through capital market associations, through banking associations, in seeking to raise the bar and level the playing field across an entire sector. In essence, helping get the sector ready to take advantage of this market opportunity, in addition to targeting focus at individual clients. So I think that's that's a really key aspect in how do we ready the sector. And I think for a given country, how does a country align itself to other national development priorities? This could either be commitments under the Paris Agreement or specific challenges they have identified. So the ability for public sector and government to work closely with industry and industry association in kind of bridging those gaps is a key component of the equation.
Thank you. Thank you. So going back to the point that was raised earlier about issuers, we need more issuers, we need development. Kurt, from your perspective, when you're advising clients to do these sorts of deals, can you talk a bit, I mean, it's been hit upon a few times about the costs and benefits for a borrower of doing thematic bonds, and beyond just the activism and feeling good about the deal. I mean, is there a financial benefit?
Yeah. I think in my experience, there's a real big benefit, and the thing is, we can look at the execution of the transaction and just say, well, there are maybe a few basis points, and then there's the larger big picture, no? And I'll talk about the first part. When you think about an issuer going through this whole process that I described to be ready to issue a green bond, and if it is properly marketed, and if it is precisely good ESG that you are presenting to investors will get very excited about it. And if you get investor excitement, that means that you are going to do a better marketing of the transaction, and you're going to get best execution of the transaction. When you say best execution from a capital markets point of view, okay, there's a range where the investment banker says you're gonna go to the market between this and this range, which is where you are categorized. And if you are able to tighten that price, that is something super valuable for the CFO. When the CFO understands that this whole sustainability story is valuable, that is already a very, very valuable battle that has been won. And why would that happen? When you go through the whole process of issuing a green bond, you have a dialogue between the CFO, the Chief Sustainability Officer, if that position already exists, and operations. And there is this whole process catalyzes the advancement of ESG management within the company. And I think that when a company has good management of the ESG risks and opportunities, that translates into a higher value for the company. And I think sometimes we are just focused on the cents, and we're not looking at the dollars or the pesos or whatever, right? I mean, we're not looking at the larger value of this whole thing, that you are actually injecting ESG DNA into the company. And when you put that into the culture of the company, that is an additional value that you have created. And I think that is the big benefit of doing thematic bonds. And I think that when CEOs and boards start to understand that, that's when this thing is going to accelerate even more.
Is it an upfront cost that outweighs the benefit in terms of the savings, in terms of a couple of basis points? Or is it?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, this upfront cost is something that you are going to spend anyways. I mean, we will need to actually pay a lot of attention to externalities. that is going to be baked into regulations in the short or in the long term. I mean, we are seeing it in the developed market. It will eventually go to each of our neighborhoods. We will have to pay a lot of attention to social and environmental issues. Otherwise, this is not sustainable. And so therefore, if you spend it now and you are a leader, you are differentiating your company from the others. And it is better to be there, as Carol said, to be there first and have a higher impact than being like the fourth or fifth that is doing this. So I think that the benefits way outweigh the costs.
But is it, and this is a question for everyone on the panel, is it a luxury that, you know, is too costly for most borrowers in the region, because the region's been through a very tough time, in economically speaking. There has been a very big impact from the COVID crisis. So, you know, companies need cash just to survive in some cases. Is it, just going back to my organic food analogy, is it something that only the rich can afford?
Definitely not. I'll jump in on that one if I may. I mean, I think, you know, it's a luxury to have the privilege to live in a clean environment. And I think when we contemplate that these resources are generally defined as finite, we really do have to transition onto a more sustainable growth curve. And I think Kurt makes the point importantly, which is the value of externalities. And I think that's what we're seeing in the marketplace, is the marketplace is slowly beginning to price in these externalities. It's most obvious in the context of climate. But over the medium and long term, the price of these externalities are translated into real costs and real risks for companies. So rather than being a luxury or a nice to have for companies to do, it is really, I think, in the not so distant future, being translated into a must have. And the market's valuing it. I think Bloomberg itself has forecasts that suggest that by 2025, the value for ESG investments is going to represent $50 trillion, 1/3 of the total value of all assets under management. And I think that's simply a somewhat conservative forecast on the fact that investors and the investor market is really going to start to value more critically the incorporation of these risks.
Oops.
I think we've lost you. Yeah, we've lost Colin, but I'm going to carry on nonetheless, and we'll maybe get him back shortly. But we have a lot of questions from the audience, and I really want to get to those. So I'm just going to throw these out there to the panel, and feel free to jump in. One of them just asks generally about the Caribbean and especially the Dominican Republic. What is being done in terms of thematic bond issuance for those?
Okay. So maybe I can take this one. As I said earlier, one of our objectives is to develop capital markets, and also a big objective for the smallest country and the island. So we want to be able to help in the Caribbean, and we were involved in a gender bond in the Caribbean, and maybe for an issuance early next year. So the way that IDB Invest is working, and also it's going back to the question of cost, we want to help the smallest company, smallest country. And we know that the pandemic has been impacting, and they will be more conscious in spending money as well, but it's where IDB Invest can help. So it's not solely that we can participate to the issuance of the transaction. We are going to do it in the Dominican Republic soon, but we can also help in putting in place the structure of thematic bonds. We internally develop the framework for our clients, So it's developed as part of our traditional development effectiveness analysis and framework. And also we can support the issuer with respect to technical cooperation and to pay also for part of the second party opinion or the certification, depending on the type of thematic bond. Just also to speak about something tangible, what is the cost, this additional cost of an external review? It could be in the order of 30,000 K. It's true that if you are doing a big transaction, you dilute this cost relatively quickly. But we have to be cognizant that for some of the small countries, 10 million issuance is already a big size. So we take that into consideration. So yes, we want to do more in the smaller region. So we have opportunity. We did a lot with respect to gender bond. And also Rema mentioned some of the transactions we've been involved in. And it has been one of the focus. So in the Dominican Republic, it's one of the examples, but obviously we still want to be active in a green, resilient transaction because of the Caribbean. Last week, we announced also a guide with respect to blue bonds, and we'll be happy to help any issuer who are considering a blue issuance aspect as well.
Thank you. It's an associated question. What kinds of industries other than banks are you really seeing getting involved in this market, and what's the sort of average size of issuance?
Okay, so there is a difference, as I said earlier, between the type of transactions that we support for thematic bond insurance and the type of companies that you've seen issuing recently with the large sustainability linked bond issuance, which were accessing or being tapping into the international capital markets. We had the Simpa, Natura, big Suzano, Clabin. So these are really type of issuer already have access and well known in the market. For IDB Invest, we are looking at issuers who may be needing our help because they, for instance, they want to bridge into the international capital market. So maybe they will need a credit guarantee from IDB Invest as well, or they need an anchor investment in order to attract more investors. So there is a big difference. So our target was, as I said earlier, mostly financial institutions because it helps us to go and really support the real economy. But we want to do more in infrastructure. We've been involved also in the real estate in Mexico with the first green by CADU, the first green bond by a real estate company in Mexico. We have done a sustainable bond in Mexico as well for a real estate developer. We want to be able to work in the agribusiness. Sometimes it's a bit difficult in order to find the thematic angle, but we've got transaction as well in our pipeline, and obviously infrastructure and renewable energy.
Great, thank you. If anyone else from the panel wants to jump in, please feel free. But another question really about the lack of issuance that I think Carol mentioned earlier. Just 2% of global issuance in thematic bonds from Latin America, but you know, it has been a region that's quite ahead of the curve in terms of environmental impact and looking ahead at you know the real climate initiatives in this country. So what's holding Latin America back? Why has it been so slow?
Well, maybe I can say a few things. I think an event like this one and a lot of the work that the IDB Invest is doing is part of what is going to catalyze this market. I think that it takes some time to take off, and when you look at the different countries, you can see, like for instance, the market in Brazil is getting is seeing a huge growth. You see a few countries catching up, so it is a little bit uneven, but it is hitting a nerve, and people are seeing the value. I think there are a couple of things. In thematic bonds, you need to have the use of proceeds in order to say, okay, this can be called green or this can be called sustainable. For instance, when you look at a big country, when you look at like an issuer like Chile, Chile recognized the value of this as a sovereign issuer. We worked with them to set up their framework, and since they put the framework from green into sustainable, they started issuing sustainable, social, green, and they issued more than $6 billion since last quarter, the last quarter of last year. So there is a huge potential. I think when the issuers find, let's say, their sweet spot, it happens. You can see large companies in Mexico starting to issue sustainability-linked bonds, for instance, or there are a few of the large companies that are going to that next level of sustainable finance, where you don't have the use of proceeds, it's general corporate purpose, but you're issuing with a commitment to meet certain sustainability targets through KPIs that you need to achieve, and that is a very interesting instrument to go and participate in the sustainable finance market. So I think that then there are certain areas like Carol was mentioning it, and Colin as well, like sustainable agriculture. That is an area that has a lot of potential. But then you have water and sanitation. I mean, water and sanitation, you have a huge investment gap, and water and sanitation is, let's say, intrinsically green already. So there is an opportunity there to have extensive issuance. So I believe that this market has a huge potential to grow.
One more associated question: is there a system of audit of the bond proceeds in terms of realizing the goals and impacts, and what's the potential for fraud?
Well, what happens is that companies are asked or commit to do annual reporting, and I think it was mentioned before, the IDB and the IDB Invest have established this green green transparency platform in order to have companies showcase their performance and make their performance comparable. So the instruments and the tools are out there to avoid that. No, and as I said, I mean, if a company wants to commit fraud, I mean, that is something that is an outlier. No, I mean, in general, everybody that goes to the market and is trying to do the right thing will be doing the right thing.
I think sorry, go ahead, Carol.
Yes, I mean, we are cognizant that transparency and integrity are critical to the participation of the investor. And just to highlight, yes, this green transparency platform specific to Latin America and the Caribbean. And the idea behind it, yes, for our issuers to participate, other issuers in the region, but also to be copied and replicated elsewhere.
I think we'll close with one last question on just the outlook. Obviously, the pandemic that we've talked about has driven a lot of this issuance and really created an opportunity. But what keeps it going after that? What are the drivers for thematic bond issuance from Latin America? And that's for everyone on the panel, please. Anyone who wants to answer the question.
I'll jump in with a quick answer there. I mean, I think it's fundamentally investor interest, and I think we just see a far more sophisticated investor interest in these assets. And you know, it's not just institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, public pensions. I mean, it's broadening into the retail segments as well. I mean, I think there's broad recognition that more responsible companies pay their contribution and some back to society, and that market pie is very much there. So I think that's a key trend we'll continue to see in the really not so distant future.
Carol, do you want to say anything about
I would like to just
go ahead, David.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, Latin America is one of the regions with the greatest biodiversity in the world, but we are also extremely vulnerable to climate change. For that reason, we must anticipate and invest in solutions that reduce these risks. Also, there are companies, institutions, citizens committed to sustainability. For example, what were you doing in Ecuador? The Banking Association of the country has actively promoted the inclusion of best practices in its management, standardizing social and environmental requirements. I would believe that a more attractive, agile, and adaptable economic impulse to the situation of the countries and sectors in LATAM is lacking, as well as awareness and constant technical support for the development of environmental friendly businesses. As financiers, we can help minimize risks and enhance opportunities, being a strategic partner for our stakeholders.
Thank you. Carol, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think I'm fine. I agree as well. We have to be ready for more spilling over of ESG investors that are now attracted by developing markets, by Latin America, diversification of the portfolio. So yes, I think this would be really the big difference. And we witnessed with the growth recently, at least for the beginning of this year, in terms of thematic issuance in our region.
Thank you. And judging by the huge amount of questions I'm getting, there is a massive amount of interest in this market, and we'll be talking about this for many more years to come. I would just like to thank everyone who joined us today, and a fantastic panel. It's been really, really interesting. I look forward to continuing the conversation. I'd like to thank IDB Invest for setting this up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks, James.
Thank you, James. Thank you, IDB.
Bye.
Bye-bye.